Hello and welcome to organizing and grouping your layers. Now this is a super important section because oftentimes especially when I work in Photoshop, I create a ton of different layers. Basically, every time I'm doing something new, I'm creating a new layer because it helps me edit non-destructively. Now, after time, you're going to get a lot of layers, so it's important to know how to organize and group them together. So let's go ahead and we're going to start off opening up our sample images for this section. So I'm going to go to File and down to Open. Now let's go ahead, we're in our Chapter 2, Section 3, and I'm going to click and drag all of these different files because I want to put them all into the same document. So let's go ahead and hit Open here, and we're going to see it's going to open all of our documents as different windows. Now, depending on your settings, you may have these open as tabs. Let's just go ahead and take a look at our settings. So let's go to Photoshop, we can go to our settings, and then there we go. In Workspace here, there is an option to have open documents as tabs. Now, you can see I have this unchecked because I actually don't prefer to use tabs in Photoshop. You can obviously check or uncheck that based on your own preferences. Now, if you want them all to be in windows just like this, you can go to Window, and then you can go to Arrange, and then you can say Float All in Windows, and it'll look just like this. Okay, so as you can see, we have a bunch of different images now in different windows, and what I'd like to do is get these all into one document. I want to make a little collage with my different documents. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is just zoom out on these because they're kind of taking up my whole screen, right? So I'm going to hit Control or Command minus a couple of times and just zoom out. There we go, just to make them a little bit smaller so they don't take up as much of my screen. Okay, now let's go ahead and start with this one. We're going to go to Organizing Grouping Layers 1, and I just need to copy these other images over to this document. So what I'm going to do is click on the Move tool and hold Shift and click and drag from one image to another, and you can see it simply copies that image over as a new layer, which is perfect. Okay, so that we already copied over. Let's go ahead and do this one. Now I'm holding Shift, which is going to keep it in the middle of our new frame. Okay, so there we go. Let's copy this one. Hold Shift, click and drag. There we go. This one, Shift, click and drag. All right, and we've got one more. Shift, click and drag. So now all these layers here, like all these other documents, I don't need them. So I'm just going to close them out. You can click and hit Control or Command W, which will close them out, or you can just click on this little X. Either way. So all these we don't need because all of those are now saved as layers here on my main document. So let's hit F for full screen. Okay, now as we can see, I'm just going to turn some of these off and on. Let's go ahead and highlight them, and you can see some of these images are actually larger than the document boundaries, and some of them are smaller. So we can resize these all to actually fit within our main document. Now here's a general tip. Whenever you're going to take a large image and make it smaller, I highly recommend making that into a smart object first. And the reason is that you won't lose any quality if you decide to make it smaller and then make it bigger again. So let me just go ahead and show you how that actually works, and then we can move on with organizing our layers. So in this case, let's go ahead and just make all these layers invisible here. Okay, so we just have layer 5 is visible now. Okay, now I'm just going to make a duplicate of layer 5 just for example purposes here. Okay, let's make a duplicate of layer 5, and you can just kind of watch and see what we're doing here. Okay, now one of these layers we're going to turn into a smart object. So let's make this copy a smart object. I'm going to right click and say Convert to Smart Object. So you can see it has a little smart object icon here in the bottom right corner of the thumbnail. Okay, so now as a smart object, it basically saved out this layer as a reference. So what I'm working on now is not the layer itself, I'm working on a reference of that layer. Okay, now here's one of the main benefits of it. It's when it comes to resizing. So here's our smart object. Let's just go ahead and double click there and name it Smart Object. Now you can turn any layer into a smart object. So again, my suggestion is if you're starting out with a layer that's large and you make it smaller, I highly suggest making it a smart object first. So let's go ahead and scale down our smart object. I'm going to click on my Move tool here, okay, and then we're going to hit Control or Command T. There we go, Control or Command T, and we're just going to scale that down. So let's go ahead and make that really, really small. There we go, right about there, looks pretty good. Now we're going to do the same thing with our other layer. So let's hit Control or Command T. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt or Option, and we're going to scale it down right about the same size. Okay, so this layer here we can see is a regular layer, and here's our smart object. Now let's say we decide to make these layers larger again, right? Let's start off with our regular layer. So Control or Command T, we're going to scale this up. There we go, and hit Enter, and you can see we've lost a lot of our quality. It really does not look nearly as good as it did before. With the smart object, let's go ahead and scale this up and hit Enter, and you can see we haven't lost any of our quality. So there's with the regular layer, and that's using a smart object. And again, when you take a regular layer and shrink it down, you actually get rid of pixels. You're losing information. So when you make that bigger again, you've lost that information in the process. But a smart object is just referencing this file, so you can make it larger, smaller, whatever. You're not affecting the original file at all. You're just showing a reference of it. Okay, so that's just a little aside. Anytime you take a large file and make it smaller in Photoshop, just make it a smart object first, and that way if you decide to make it bigger again, you won't lose any quality. So because we're going to resize basically all of these layers, I'm going to convert them all into smart objects first. So here we have our first smart object. Now remember this layer 5, we really don't need that anymore, right? Because we already have a good version of it in this smart object. So I can just click on the trash can icon, and that's going to delete it. So let's go ahead and turn all these layers back on. I'm going to convert them to smart objects. Okay, you want to make sure your layer is visible before you convert it to a smart object. There we go. Let's do this one as well. All right, and our background layer also. Very good. Now, if I make all of these invisible, you can see we have nothing on the background. So what I'm going to do first is grab our adjustment layers. So remember, you can click here, this little circle, half of it light, half of it dark. Let's click there. I'm going to go to solid color, and let's go all the way up to white. And basically, this is just going to put this right here on the bottom. This is just going to give us a white background. Okay, so let's go ahead and start off with our first image. Now, let's go ahead and rescale this just a little bit smaller. Hit Control or Command T, and then I'm going to hold Shift and click on this corner and just drag it down. All right, so basically, I just want these different images here to fit within the canvas. There we go. All right, and keep in mind, if I decide to make them larger again, not a big deal because they're smart objects, so I won't have lost any of my quality. Okay, perfect. Well, now we're ready to start organizing our layers. So the first thing I want to show you guys is changing our layer order and how that affects what you see in Photoshop. So basically, you're going to see whatever's on the top, you're going to see that on the top. So in this case, I'm clicked on this layer here. Okay, you can see it's above all the other layers in our layer stack, and it's also above all the layers visually. Now, if you want a layer to go above that layer, there's a couple ways you can do it. You can click and drag that layer right up, and you can see now this is actually on the top of our layer stack, and visually it's on the top as well. Now, there's a really helpful keyboard shortcut to move these layers up or down. So to move your layers up and down, hit Control or Command and use the open and close brackets on your keyboard. So here we have our layer 4. Let's say I want to move that down. I'm going to hold Control or Command and hit the open bracket a couple times, and you see that's just moving it down. Okay, you can move it all the way down to the bottom and bring it back up again. Now, if you want to select multiple layers, you can do this as well. So I'm going to hold Shift and click on this layer. You can see they're both highlighted now. Hit Control or Command and move them both down or both all the way up. Now, if you'd like to move them all the way up or all the way down, hold Shift and Command and open and close brackets. So Shift, Command, and open bracket, I'm going to move them all the way down, close bracket, and they're moving all the way up. So if you have a layer, you're like, oh, you know what, I like this layer the best, hold Shift, Command, close bracket, and it's going to automatically put it all the way up to the top of your layer stack. Now let's go ahead and select all of our layers and shrink them down just so we can see what we're actually doing. So I'm going to click on my top layer here, hold Shift, and then click on this layer. So we've got them all selected, and you can see I can actually scale them all at the same time. So I'm going to grab my Move tool and hold Shift, and then just scale them all down right to about there. And again, because they're smart objects, I can make them larger at any time. I'm not going to lose my quality. Okay, so now that we have all of our different layers, let's go ahead and click on each one of our layers, and I can move this around. Now, I do have an option here. When I'm with my move tool, you'll notice that if I click on this layer and move around, no matter where I'm clicking on my document, it's going to move that layer. Okay, now sometimes you actually want to be able to click on the image itself and have it auto-select the layer, and then you can move it around. So that option is here within your move tool. So click on your move tool, you can click on auto-select, and you can choose between layer or group. In this case, we'll choose layer. So now if I click here, look at that. It's going to automatically let me move whatever I'm clicking on, and it'll select the appropriate layer for me. Now, I prefer to have this unchecked, and you can use a keyboard shortcut to basically do the same thing. So if that's unchecked, again, I'm using my move tool. No matter where I click, it's going to still work with that layer. But if you hold Control or Command and then click on a new layer, that basically holding Control or Command temporarily enables auto select. Okay, so hold Control or Command, then you can move these around just by clicking on them. There we go. You can see I brought that underneath it. I can hold Control or Command, close bracket, and it's going to move it right above there if I decide that that's what I want to do. Okay, so now we can see moving and organizing our images is a lot easier because I can actually see what we're doing. All right, now let's say I've got images here. I've got 3 images that have flowers in them. So I want to bring this down. I'm going to hold Control or Command and bring this up. And I want to go ahead and make sure all my images with flowers are together. I want to put these in a group. So what I'm going to do is make sure I click on this image here. You can see that's this right here. If I hold Control or Command, okay, that's going to select this one. And hold Control or Command, that's going to select this one. So what I want to do is select all 3 of these now. And I don't want to search here in my layers, honestly, because it's just a little bit harder to do than just visually here in my document. So let's go ahead and select multiple layers here in our document. So again, just grab your move tool, hold Control or Command to select each individual layer. Now if you want to select multiple layers, simply hold Shift as well. So I'm holding Shift and Command. We're going to select this one, and I'm going to select that one. Okay, so you can see that all 3 are selected, and then here we can see that all 3 are selected as well. Okay, so now all those layers are together, and let's just say, you know, obviously we've got a lot of layers here, so I want to start organizing things a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring all 3 of those up to the top. Okay, so they're all selected, so to bring them up to the top, I'm just going to hold down Control, and I can hit close bracket a couple times, and they'll move them all the way to the top. Or you can hold Shift, close bracket, all the way to the top, or all the way to the bottom. So Shift just puts it all the way up. If you just hit Control or Command, it moves it up 1 spot. Okay, so now all 3 of these are up at the very top. But it still doesn't help me out a lot because I'm like, you know what, this may get lost with whatever I'm doing. So I want to treat all 3 of these layers as one group. And this is where we're going to introduce groups, which are very, very useful. So if you want to make a group from your layers, just hit Control or Command G, and that's going to group them all together. So let's hit Control or Command G. It's going to put them all in a group. There we go. Now you can open and close your group and see the images that are, or the layers that are inside of that group at any point in time. Okay, so we have our group 1. There we go. Let's go ahead and group these 3 layers together as well. So let's Shift click those and hit Control or Command G. So you can see now we're quite a bit more organized than when we started. Now we're going to take this one step further because I enjoy naming my groups. Now there is a couple of schools of thought here, and you can go with whatever preference works for you. Some people like to name all of their layers. It's really easy to do. If you want to name a layer, you just double click right here, okay, and you can give it a name. Flowers. I spelled that wrong, but that's okay. Some people like to name every single one of their layers. Now, I tend to use a ton of layers, so I usually don't name my individual layers. Usually I'll group like layers together, and I'll just name the group. That just helps me save a little bit of time. So let's go ahead and click on this group here. You can just double click there, and I'll call that flowers. Okay, and I'll just double click right here, and I'm going to call this details of our collage. Okay, so flowers and details. Now, I also like to take things one step further and actually give objects colors in Photoshop, especially when I'm working with a lot of layers. To give a group a color, really easy to do. Just right click here on the little eyeball, it's the visible or invisible icon. Just right click there and you can choose a color. So I'm going to give that the color red, and then the details, we're going to give that the color orange. You know what? I'll just group this with itself. Background, and I'm going to give that the color yellow. Okay, so now you can see we're pretty well organized, right? If I want to find an image that has flowers in it, I'm in my flower group, I open this up, you can see it automatically colors every single layer inside of that group with red as well. So I can see where this group starts and where it ends, details, and my background. I'm good now. I'm not going to get confused by what's in my layers. We're all set. Now, just like we were able to move layers up and down, we're able to do the same thing with groups. So let's go ahead and take our flower group. You can see it's at the top. So if I bring this over here, it's going to show up on the top of all my other images, right? If I click on this group and hit Control or Command open bracket, it's just going to move it down, and I could move it all the way down to below my background if I wanted to. Okay, so I'm able to treat multiple layers as I'm able to treat a group just like I would layers, moving them up and down. I'm also able to transform them. So if I want to hit Control or Command T, I can scale all the layers in a group. There we go. We could make that really big. And because everything inside of this is a smart object, even if I resize this and make it large again, there we go. Once I hit Enter, you're going to see we have our full quality back again. Okay. Now, we've used layer masks on regular layers already. Remember, a layer mask will just hide or show a part of that layer. Well, you can actually use masks on groups as well. So, if I want to click on my mask icon, you can see now we have our flowers group has a mask to it. Now, I can just paint with my brush tool, and I could paint black away. It would paint over everything that's inside of this entire group, make it invisible, or I can paint white, and it's going to become visible again. Okay, so if you have a bunch of like layers that you want to basically treat as one, there we go. You can add them into a group and then put a layer mask on that group. And this layer mask affects the visibility of everything that's inside of the group. So let's say we had, there we go, let's do something like that. Let's say I took one of these detail layers, okay, and I decided to put this in my flower group. I'm going to do that by holding Control or Command close bracket once and then twice. You can see it pops it over. So now it's in that group. I'm going to right click here, go back to red, and that's going to recolor everything that's inside of it. And now if I just move this down here, you can see it's being affected by the same layer mask. So its visibility is being controlled by the mask that's on the group. Now if I want to move that back out of this group in my details group, I'm going to just hold Control or Command and hit open bracket once, and then once again, and you're going to see it's going to pop it into my details group now. Okay, and then I'm just going to right click here and go back to orange, and it's going to recolor everything in that group. So let's go ahead and put that right back up there. Okay, so there we go. Now this layer mask that we made this invisible, I'm going to click on the layer mask, go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're going to fill this with white, making completely visible. So now let's create our little collage, and for this I'm going to do a reorganization of my groups. So let's go ahead and let's see, we have our flowers group. I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to delete group. Let's just delete that. You have the option to delete the group and all the contents in it, or just the group. So I'm going to say just the group, just go away, and I'm left with my flowers now. Okay, I've got my detail group. Let's go ahead and delete that one, just the group there. Okay, and I have all my different layers together. I'm going to shift click on all these, right click on my little eyeball, and give them no color again. So we're basically starting over. And the reason I'm doing that is because now it's much easier to select my individual layers. Because when you group layers together, they start to act as a group. So if I try to select individual layers, it's just a little bit more complicated. So I removed them from the group, and now I can size and scale and create my collage, and then when I'm ready to go, I can group them back together again. After all, I'm just trying to show you guys how to organize and group things and whatnot. So basically, we're just kind of like doing things over and over again so you guys get the hang of it. So let's go ahead and start off with our dress here. Again, Move tool, I'm going to hit Control or Command, T. I'm going to hold Shift and click and drag, and we're just going to, there we go. We're just going to bring this right to about there and make this a little bit larger. Now it's covering some things up, so I'm going to hold Control or Command and just bring that right down to the bottom. Okay. Now let's go hit Control or Command and grab a couple of these layers. Perfect. There we go. And I'm going to grab this layer as well. Control or Command, click on that one. And let's just bring this right up to about there. Now in this case, this is just going to be like a little bit larger. There we go. You can kind of see it's like kind of going outside of my like collage area. So what I'm going to do for this layer is I'm going to grab my marquee tool. Let's create a selection right about here. Perfect. Okay, so our selection, I'm going to use that selection to create a layer mask, making this layer only visible right there. So let's click on our layer mask icon, so that layer is now only visible right there, and it helps me with my entire collage. Now these other layers, I'm going to just hit Control or Command and click on that, make it invisible. Control and click on that one, make that one invisible too, because you can see I want all three of these layers to have the same line on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and hit Control or Command and Shift and select all three of those. Okay, now I've got my Move tool here, so I'm going to left align all of them, so they're perfectly left aligned, each of them. Now, I want to put a layer mask on all three of these because, again, I want the right-hand side to be the exact same edge. So if I want the layer mask to be the exact same for all three of these, I'm just going to put them all in a group, and then we're going to put a mask on that group. So let's hit Control or Command G, okay, and I'm just going to call this middle row. Actually, that's a column, middle column. Okay, now let's put a layer mask on here. I'm going to use my marquee selection tool to create a mask, or to create a selection. There we go. And here on my layer mask, I'm going to go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're going to choose to fill that with black. There we go. Okay, so now that I've filled that with black, it's actually pretty cool. So if I want to move any of these layers around, let's say I want to move this layer to the right, you can see, well, let's go ahead and make sure we fill this left hand with black as well. So let's fill this left hand with black here on the group. All right, fill that with black. So now you can see if I move this image to the left or the right, I'm basically telling it, because it's inside of this group, it's only going to be visible right there. Okay, so as I move it to the left and the right, you can see it's not going to show up past that certain area. Now this layer is actually a little bit more complicated, and the reason is because this layer, remember, it has its own layer mask on it also, and it's a part of this group. So I can move this left or the right, which is pretty cool. But let's say I want this image to move down, but I want the layer mask to stay in the same place, but I want the image itself to move. Okay, now here's our layer mask. So if I move one, it's going to move the other as well. But if I click on this little chain link icon, it's going to unlink them. So I can move my layer, and my layer mask is going to stay in the same place. So as I move my layer, now you can see my mask is staying in the same place, and I can link them back together. Or I could click on my mask and just move my mask, and you can see the layer is staying in the same place. Okay, so layers and layer mask can be linked and unlinked as well. All right, now we're going to go over all this stuff over and over again, so if you're like, whoa, this is a lot, don't worry about it. We're going to continue covering all of this stuff. Okay, now we have our left column here. That looks great, so let's go ahead and just group that image with itself. I'm going to call this left column. Okay, we're going to give this a color, so let's go ahead and make that red. Our middle column, let's make that orange. Let's do a little bit of organization. So our left column, I'm going to hold Control or Command, close bracket, to move that up to the top. Okay, and now we've got two other layers here, and let's figure out what we want to do with these. So let's go ahead and make these a little bit larger. There we go. Control or Command, click on these. And now I'm going to use a group to define where these are visible. Okay, so let's go ahead and group those together. Okay. Double click on that group. I'm going to just call this right column. There we are. Okay. Now the contents in this group, I'm going to go ahead and make those invisible temporarily. Let's put a layer mask on this group. And then on this layer mask, I'm going to fill it with black. So it's going to be invisible everywhere. So let's go to Edit, down to Fill, and we're just going to fill that with black. And now I'm going to use my marquee tool to just choose where I want it to be white. So we'll say, you know what, right about there. I want it to be visible there. So let's go to Edit, down to Fill. And you can see I'm on my layer mask for the group, which is defining the visibility for everything that's inside of the group. We're going to fill that with white. Let's hit OK. Okay, and then my selection tool, we'll just bring that right down here. And we're going to fill that with white as well. Okay. Now, if I hold Alt or Option and take a look at my layer mask, or my group mask in this case, this is what the mask looks like for the group. So Alt or Option, you can see what the actual mask looks like. So now if I make this layer visible, okay, you can see it's only going to be visible in this area. Okay, and I can bring it right to about there. And then this layer as well is only going to be visible in that area, and I can kind of move it right into the place that I want as well. All right, well, here we are, guys, looking really good. Now, my right column, I'm going to go ahead and make that green. That looks pretty good. And let's say I want to border on all of this. Okay, I want to border on all of this. Well, what I'm going to do is hold Control or Command and click on all three. So start with my first one, Control or Command, click on all three of these columns. So I have my left column, my middle column, and my right column all selected now. I'm going to group them all. So you can group groups within groups. Let's just call these photos. There we go. And now I'm going to create a selection. There we go. That's going to be slightly smaller. Something like that looks pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and click on my layer mask, and I'm going to hold Alt or Option and click on my let's just click on the layer mask, and it's going to make everything that's inside of there only visible within this area. So you can see my layer mask basically just defines a perfect area right around there. And then I can just hit C for my crop tool and even up the border just a little bit. And hit Enter. And there we go. So now we have a perfect border around all of these images. You can see they all start and stop in the exact same place because they're all defined within this mask group. And we have our left column, our middle column, and our right column. So everything is organized very well and super defined. So now I'm going to go ahead and save this image and close it out. So Control or Command S to save, and then Control or Command W to close it out. Now let's go ahead and open this back again. So here's our PSD. We're going to open this again, and here you can see all of our information is still intact. So we have our left column here. There we go. We have our middle column with each of our three images. I can turn off all these. And remember, all these layer masks I can turn off and on at any time. So we have access to our original photos. We haven't destroyed any information here. We haven't actually cut these photos. We're simply masking them, making them not visible in certain areas. So all of our photos are available to us. And if we want to get back to the full size of any of these, remember we made them all smart objects. So I'm going to hit Shift F to get out of our full screen view and just double click right here on this layer. And here you can see this is our original photo in full resolution. We're simply using a smart object here in this version. So let's go ahead and close that out, and we're good to go. Thanks so much for watching, guys. In our next section, we're going to show you how to align different layers with each other as well as with the entire canvas. This is going to be super helpful if you're creating any type of graphics. All right, thanks so much. We'll see you in the next section.